But actually, of course, it's integrated from a social point of view. This is an aerial shot of the south part of London. You can recognise one or two of the landmarks, the eye and the big structure in the middle is Waterloo Station. So all of these interrelated transport modes work in London, but nothing like as well as they should, because they're not treated as an integrated system, even in London. And although that's a complex city, you would have thought in London it would have been easier to do that. We do have an authoritative body, Transport for London, that is supposed to be able to do that. But because a lot of the execution of the operation is in private hands, it's very difficult to get all of those things together, in particular the data. We're talking about data, and the ability to get hold of data, real-time data. It's really difficult because the operators regard it as competitive advantage. So we've locked ourselves into a position which isn't in the public good. The platforms we're now looking at to change things are high-speed rail. There's a consultative document out right now from Philip Hammond, the Secretary of State for Transport in the UK, to see what the public attitudes would be to the generation of a high-speed rail link between London, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Edinburgh and Glasgow. It's pointing vaguely at the inverted map of the UK. And that would cost anywhere between 35 and 50 billion over a period of about 25 years. And reduce journey times and provide dedicated passenger transport up the spine of the country towards the north. We're looking, as you are, at bus systems that are based on very low carbon energy systems, and I noticed an LNG bus in Sydney when I was there earlier in the week. We have them too. This is a fuel cell bus running on hydrogen as a prototype to see how that works. So we're trialling lots of different ways of providing transit systems in our cities based on different technologies. We're re-examining the use of coastal shipping as a way of shifting freight between ports rather than putting it on our motorways or our railway systems. We have quite a, as you do, a major leisure system, maritime industry to worry about, and that of course intermixes with the commercial shipping, because our water systems are very much mixed up. So we have major boat control, if I can call it that, rather than air traffic control, boat traffic control, in and around our major ports, like Dover and Southampton and up the East Coast. And some of the leisure craft are now getting quite big, quite powerful, and therefore are not necessarily any more manoeuvrable than some of the big freighters that we have, freight carrying vessels. As I've already mentioned, aviation congestion, which we've all experienced, it's like that. And then nasty things happen occasionally. For the maritime people in the room, I apologise for showing a picture like this, must make your toes curl. This one was off the Dorset coast. The containers were full of BMW spare parts. Can you imagine what happened as soon as that was accessible to the general public? We had to put police cordons around that for 18 months while we salvaged it in order to stop people stealing BMW spare parts off the container. Which wasn't, that wasn't in the script, that we were going to have to do that. Just to give you some more numbers to gallop through, buses declined very fast between 1970 and 2000, but it's beginning to turn around again as a result of better information about bus services. And as I said, rail has sort of potted along, but it's now beginning to come up, largely due to congestion on our roads. However, if you look over a longer timescale, this is between 1940 and 1950, and 2010, you can see the rapid growth of car transport between the 50s and 60s, and the decline of all the other public modes of transport. So that landscape, I know, is different in every country of the world, and that just to describe what situation we're living with, to give you an indication of how our transport, surface transport situation actually is. On the other hand, aviation, which is why I said what I said about not building a third runway at Heathrow. The inexorable and non-linear rise in air travel has really made huge demands on our airspace and our runway space. And we've, up to now, been managed to cope by being really clever in the way we use our technology. I saw a TV program not long ago of the manager of Heathrow in 1973 saying, there's no way we're going to get more aircraft into Heathrow. They're landing once every 5 minutes. We now land them once every 45 seconds. thanks to technology and really good systems engineering around the organisation of the exploitation of the airspace. But there's something in me that says changing that from 45 seconds to 30 seconds is just going to get just a wee bit too tight. But we need to do that analysis, because if you can do 5 minutes to 45 seconds, maybe we can squeeze a bit more out. There's a huge amount of debate as to what a bad thing transport is. But actually, when you look at emissions from all sectors, and I've excluded aviation purely because I couldn't get the numbers in, commercial and domestic is where most of the CO2 emissions come from. Transport is big, but it's not the biggest, it's the third biggest as far as the UK is concerned. So we're putting a lot of energy, political energy into reduction of domestic emissions and industrial and commercial emissions, as well as transport. But within the transport sector itself, it's quite clear that the cars and motorcycles, predominantly therefore cars, are the things we really have to worry about, but not to neglect road freight. When this table was prepared and the statistics were derived, of course our statistics are very much about transport that is either on road or in the air or in the sea or on road. What we've now started to discover is there's another piece of emissions that comes from what people think of as transport, which is called off-road vehicles. Largely it's civil construction and agriculture. And one of the things we've discovered in our country, and I'd be fascinated to know what it looks like in Australia, is there's probably 1/10 as many vehicles, but their duty cycle is 100%. You very rarely find a car that's got a duty cycle of more than about 5 to 10%. But if the guys who operate these big construction machines get in them in the morning, turn it on, that's it, it's on until they leave and go home. So it may be on for 10, 12 hours a day. Certainly true of agricultural machinery as well. So you've got a big thumping diesel engine going away at a much greater duty cycle than the on-road vehicles, and their footprint is now beginning to worry us, because those numbers are a bit scary. So off-road vehicles, and because of the large-scale engineering works that you do, I'd be interested to know where those, if you've got those sorts of numbers, because we're having difficulty gathering some of it. I'll change to talk about another piece of infrastructure, water. This is the water management system around the middle part of England, where you can see we manage water through a mixture of regulating our rivers, having some pipelines, and canals, all sorts of, and those old canals that I talked about, we use those for moving water around as well. So we have a network of water management around the middle of England, but it tends to be in that middle part of England. We don't have any sort of trunk water management from one place where it rains a lot to another place where a lot of it is needed. And we're beginning to realise with the weather patterns that are now projected for the future, we do need to think about doing that. Of course, that's one element of water management. The other is one which is to do with flooding. The flash floods that we had in 2007, this is a satellite photo of the River Severn, again, similar illustration. You can see the dark blue line is where the river normally runs, and the light blue is where it actually extended to. So it was quite considerable, and 300,000 families were without, 20,000 were without electricity, and 300,000 were nearly without water, because there was one critical substation that operated all the water pumps. They had not appreciated that single point of failure till they got there just in time. The overall, what do we use water for, which is an interesting set of statistics. A lot of water is used for energy. It's used in power stations to cool power stations down, and it's used by the water industry itself for purposes that they don't quite understand, like leaks. Because of the age of our water infrastructure, they just lose it. Which is tragic given the amount of money that's put into purifying it, because quite a lot of it is lost after it's been made potable. Significant amount in manufacturing, and of course there is the domestic use. And most people again don't realise that the domestic use is actually toilet flushing and personal washing, baths and taps. So there's a lot we are looking at to see how we can economise on the use of cleaned water, because it costs a lot to clean water. But at the moment we don't have an ambition to have a potable and non-potable water, although you could think of doing that if you're going to recycle water in an industrial complex. So there's lots of quite neat systems thinking going on at that sort of scale, but little of it at a more national scale. Very quickly moving on to waste management, where we put our waste. This is industrial and commercial waste. This is what comes out of your house at the end of the week, 2 weeks, and gets collected by, I assume, and taken away. So we have been trying to reduce landfill. We've been increasing recycling, but do we use the energy recovery, other recovery? Not a bit of it. About 60% of the mass of what goes out of your house in packaging and other disposables is water. 60%, 70% by weight that they take away in the rubbish ban every week is water. So if you could extract that water before it goes, they would take a lot less, use a lot less fuel taking it, and you could put it on your garden. Do we have any innovative technology companies in the room? That seems to us to be a no-brainer, that you ought to have a thing in your backyard that allows you to put your waste in, collect the water that you come out, and then the solid waste you do something else with. But we don't have that sort of system at the moment, because we have thought that all these things have to be, all these infrastructural services should be centrally derived for us. And I think most developed countries would have that sort of a problem. Very quickly now to finish the skim through through the UK. This is the 3G coverage of mobile in the UK. Not as complete as you would like. This is just one operator. So actually, if you map all the 5 operators on top of each other, the coverage is better, but it's still patchy. By contrast, this is the map which shows the ADSL fixed line coverage. And the red is just BT, which was, of course, the national operator until we privatised it. But where it changes colour, and forgive me, I'm red-green colourblind, so I'm not going to put a label to 2 and 3. 12% of males are red-green colourblind, are more than 2 to 3 operators and then 4 operators. So that customers have got choice, you've got competitive pricing, and that actually works quite well. And most of that is in and around urban areas. Whereas BT has an obligation to provide broadband, even in places where there's no competition. It has that public service obligation still. But as you can see, we have pretty well now ADSL coverage across the whole country in England. Wales and Scotland are treated as different countries for this purpose, which is why we don't have the information, because they have a different way of releasing the statistics. What does it actually look like? Well, actually, it's quite useful to remember what this stuff looks like. That's a big switching centre. Quite often, switching centres like that, people say, I don't really want that sort of in the place in the building where most people go. Let's put it in the basement. The rest is history. You take out that with the flood, you take out a sizable chunk of your telecoms capability. And yet, if you don't put it in the basement, this stuff can be quite heavy. It's very energy intensive. It's quite difficult to put into buildings. So protecting this sort of infrastructure is something that, certainly if you're a BT, you know how to do. But if you're a private operator that uses this stuff for some other purpose, they may not have that expertise to understand what they should do with it. And of course, the consumer sees all this through the lens of one of these types of devices. So hopefully that's given you a quick sort of skate around what the landscape for all of these various things look like in the UK.